Meeting of the Finance Standing Committee is called to order at 10:32 a.m. on Wednesday, December 11th. We'll start with our roll call, and then as we approve the agenda, we're actually going to enter executive session to vote to enter executive session. But roll call, Alderwoman Finlayson.
Present.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
Present.
And Alderman Huntley here. All right, moving on to the approval of our agenda. Do I see a motion to amend the agenda to add an executive session at the beginning?
Mr. Chair, I'll move that we amend the agenda to include an executive session.
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And all those in favor of approving the agenda as amended say aye.
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 All right. That puts us to the first item of business, which is our executive session, which I believe we then have to separately vote to move into executive session. So all those in favor of moving into an executive session, say aye.
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 Aye. All right. We are now in executive session. Pando, back on. All right, continuing with our agenda, we're on to the approval of minutes. For anybody watching at home, I did just want to say, I should have said this beforehand, we moved into executive session to discuss a personnel matter, and that's why. Should have mentioned that beforehand. We have our approval of minutes from our last Finance Committee meeting, which was actually over a month ago on November 6th. Do I see a motion to approve the regular meeting minutes from November 6th?
Motion to approve 11/6/24 meeting minutes.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, let's keep moving. Our fund transfer. We have from the police department for supplies and other capital outlay. Do I see any? Yeah, okay, our wonderful folks from the police department. Now, let me say, I had my first visit yesterday to police department headquarters. Had a great time. I got to see you and talk with Chief Jackson. Is your ankle doing better?
It is a little bit better. I'm slowly, just soft tissue damage, so nothing too bad.
Oh, well, glad to see you here today. Glad you made it. So you guys want to jump in and explain this to us?
Sure. First of all, I'm Captain Amy Megeth, the captain of administrative services at the police department, and this is
I'm Craig Medley, and I am the police administrative manager.
so we're asking for a transfer from our supplies and other account, $53,000 to capital outlay, and this is for our range renovation. Our firing range to cover additional expenses for lead abatement, disposal, and electrical needs of the range ventilation.
Do I hear any questions?
I do have a question. For general buildings, or is it just, do we still occupy the building by the cemetery? So any capital needs are all related to Taylor Avenue? Okay. That was my question, Mr. Chair.
No questions.
I'll make a motion that we give a favorable recommendation to FT 525.
I'll second.
All those in favor of making a favorable motion, favorable recommendation for FT 525, say aye.
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 All right.
So
Thank
moved.
you.
Thank you.
Next up on the agenda is supplemental appropriation 16-25, the Community Development Block Grant. Come on up and let us know what you're looking for.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chris Jakubiak, Planning and Zoning. With me today is Teresa Wellman, once retired, now back as a part-time worker assisting the department with community development work. This first matter reflects the fact that the appropriation from HUD was different than originally budgeted for. It's a simple accounting matter. So there's no policy implications here at all.
Well, if there's no policy implications, thank you guys for all making the time to be here then, seriously. But do I see any questions from my colleagues on this?
No question. I just want to welcome Ms. Wellman back. I'm pleasantly surprised. And you have someone else at the table with
This is
you?
Denise Ruffin. And Denise is our affordable housing specialist. And she's been trying to keep up with the work that I was doing before I left.
Thank you. If it's timely, Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we give a favorable recommendation to SA 1625.
A second.
All those in favor of making a favorable recommendation for SA 16-25, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So moved. Thank you for being here today, folks. Do we have another one? You're
Yes.
Oops.
Yeah.
Just, oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, right, the next one. I don't know why I skipped over
Affordable
that. SA 18-25, Affordable Housing Trust, also from our Planning and Zoning Department. You want to jump in, Director Jakubiak?
And my apologies to Denise and to the members of the City Council for not introducing Denise Ruffin. So thank you. I'm glad you're here. And this matter is particularly related to housing. This is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The supplemental allocation appropriates $11,140 to the Housing Trust Fund. balance to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund contractual service account. The trust fund revenue for fiscal year '24 was higher than projected, and the excess will provide additional funding to our rental assistance program. So it's a matter of moving the excess funds into the fund that can actually be used in the current year.
Thank you very much. Quick question about the rental assistance program. I was under the impression that it's currently at zero and has been since October until we add this 11,000.
It's not entirely at zero, but this funding is something that OCS and Finance Office had talked about for a variety of other reasons. So we actually have already been taking some of this into account, not waiting. So it does give us a little bit more cushion, but not much, because we were aware that this was coming.
Okay. Do you want to add to that?
Okay, Finance Director Jody Dickinson. So this is from the occupancy taxes. You know, we take a % and put it into the rental assistance program. So we had a bit more in occupancy taxes than we had anticipated when we set the budget. So this is where this extra revenue comes from. And during these past few months, as they've been, typically the rental assistance depletes pretty quickly. And as extra needs have been coming up, we've been talking about this extra money and trying to get it in front of you as quickly as we could. And so we've been working in tandem with them to make sure that they know what's there, what they can spend, and then we're just waiting on this to do the final aspects of the program. And then Vicki can tell you if there's going to be any little bit left over once we finish off all current claims to it. Current commitments that we have.
And can you tell me what the total amount that, I know that this is not about the rental assistance fund, but it's in relation to it, what the total amount for the rental assistance program was for FY25?
It'll take me, okay. Vicki might have it. I'll have to look it up in the system.
Sure.
With this, the total amount available, I believe, is $154,000, just over $154,000.
And in
154,000.
154.
Yeah, 154.
And in that total, what is there a average amount that is given to somebody looking for rental assistance, or does it completely depend on the case?
It does depend on the case. The maximum is $3,000 that any one recipient can receive. That can be divided between rental assistance and utilities. The average amount that we end up awarding for rent is just over $2,000.
Okay.
So there have been 65 award, payments given to support rent, another 20 to support utilities. That average of those 65 rent payments is a little over $2,000.
All right. I think going into next budget, that's something that we really need to talk about, because I believe that this is the second year in a row that we run down the funds
Yeah.
this early in the cycle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May I? Along the same line, do we get a report on a regular basis on how much is spent in that account and others? This is out of the Office of Community Services. So how do we get our hands around what's being spent when? Because we are halfway through the year and they're almost out of money. And that does have budget implications. That sends us a clear message, I think, that we're not adequately funding it if we truly want to support that effort. But I think it would be very helpful if we are getting reports.
Yeah, I think that's certainly something that we can do, is to give a regular update on where that is. I think that there's, in addition to the budgetary discussion, I think there are probably some related discussions around eligibility criteria and some processes. OCS has been in conversation with the county and some other organizations that provide similar kinds of support to see what kind of process they use, both for some standardization, so it just doesn't feel like something entirely different, no matter, depending on where you go, but also to really make sure that those dollars are really going where they'll do the most good. And so I think there's a combined conversation that's ahead of us on that front.
So there must be some process in place.
Absolutely. Actually, Ms. Wellman was the one, when that fund was first established, who wrote the eligibility criteria that we actually still use today. And there is much to commend in that list of eligibility criteria. But I think we have found over time that there are some gaps as well that we may want to supplement.
And I think I recall seeing the guidelines that Ms. Wellman had created for us. I am surprised that finance doesn't have a tracking also. I would think that every dollar that goes out of our doors is tracked in some way by finance, not to take the responsibility away from the department that's allocating the funds. But Ms. Dickinson, am I off base with this, or, I mean?
The finance department tracks every single dollar that's going out of the city, and it's in our system, and it's in a separate account. And if I were to print a detail of that account, you would see the payments going out. But some of this information may be considered more confidential, so you'd probably want it edited and grouped a little, maybe by OCS, the program people, to get it into some kind of reportable format. So we can tell you what's been spent, check by check by check, and the support attached, but again, it is based on some confidential information.
Yeah, I'm not asking for anything that would reveal any confidential information, just the data that Ms. Buckland's provided with the number of awards, the amounts of the awards, and then we can see, and we probably could have seen last month, what shortfall there is coming up in that department. So we wouldn't have been surprised to see that moving this 11,000 would be beneficial. I just think we need that information in some form.
To be clear, it's not actually moving the funds. That's not how I would describe it. It's that every year we make an estimate of how much we're likely to collect in that category of revenue. And it is just an estimate. And so for last year, it turned out that we collected more. And so that extra that we collected is being appropriated so it can be used. So it's not coming out of some other department's funding or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have that understanding.
Okay. Nope.
It's
all
just
good.
that we're moving it to contractual services account within the Housing Trust Fund. That's what I'm reading.
It's, that's where it's being placed.
Right,
But
that's
it was not appropriated anywhere until
Okay.
council acts. Yeah.
Okay, I'm good with it. Thank you. Mr. Chair, are you ready for a motion?
I am.
Then I'll recommend we give a favorable recommendation to SA 1825.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you very much for being with us today, folks.
Thank you. Good seeing you. And welcome back.
Up next, we have a supplemental appropriation from the Office of Emergency Management, of federal grant revenue. This is one of my favorites. Oh, it's like, well, we're getting some federal grant revenue. Director Simmons, you want to tell us a little bit more about what we're doing here?
I do. You said supplemental appropriation. I'm like, But this is a Homeland Security grant. My name is Kevin Simmons. I'm the director of the Office of Emergency Management. This is a Homeland Security grant award to increase cybersecurity protection for the city of Annapolis. It will be used to cover expenses to certify a member of our ITS office and in information systems security. So we're going to get a certification for one of our folks over in IT. The grant is for $4,099. The performance period ends on August 31, 2026, and there's no match required. My favorite type of grant. So,
Can I just ask you why this is going through OEM rather than Department of IT?
so we are the masters of Homeland Security grants. And what we do is when we survey the grants that are available, we look not only in the Office of Emergency Management, but we look at Public Works, we look at Rec and Parks, who does our sheltering, and we look at Planning and Zoning, who does our damage assessment. And if we can apply any of those grant opportunities to any of those departments, we do, and we will. And this is just an example of how we work together with these different departments to get them to their goals, meeting our goals as well.
Got it. So the person who's actually going to get trained will be a DIT employee, but the grant is going through OEM.
as
Got it.
well.
Makes sense.
Yep. So, any other questions?
I do have a question.
Sure.
So this total 4,000 will go to IT?
Total. Right.
Yes.
So that's the appropriate, they are the appropriate department for cybersecurity. They are the front line with cybersecurity. So we want to make sure we have every opportunity to train their staff to meet those needs so we can stop a cyber disruption in the city if we have to. So we'll do whatever we need to do to train them.
Have we had other funding for cybersecurity?
We've had much funding for cybersecurity. I could go back and get you that information, but I think each year for the past maybe 3-4 years, we've always had some funding in the coffers for cybersecurity, and we just turned that over to Brian Paquin, the manager of our IT department.
And I'm asking that question specifically so that you could explain to those who are listening. This is not total amount of funding that we have for cybersecurity.
No.
That we have been getting funding,
This is a pittance
yes, all
of what
along.
we do. And we're always looking, we're always trying to find opportunities where we can enhance our cybersecurity by Homeland Security grants.
While we have you, and you mentioned the fact that you assist all departments with funding through the grants that we receive.
Yes,
Staffing. Your
staffing?
department, yes, your staffing.
So that's been a challenge, as everyone knows. Since October-ish, there's only been 3 folks in the Office of Emergency Management, and we have the strength of 7. So it's been a challenge and all. So we had to actually sit down and decide, what's important, what we would accomplish with 3 folks, and then what would be kind of pushed aside until we get up staffing to where we need to be. And hiring has been a challenge. We've been advertising since July for one, and then September we lost 2 other people. So we went from, again, 7 or 6 to 3. We have the strength of 7 for staffing. So we've been trying. So we've had good candidates to come through. I've made offers to about 4 of them. A lot of them would drop out during the process because they have experience and they see the upper ends of what the salary entails. And they know that they can't reach that even with their experience, so they drop out of the process. I've made offers to folks, work with HR to kind of strengthen the offer, but we still haven't had much success. So we were lucky to get a young man, Patrick Kamar, from Maryland Department of Emergency Management. He came over with us. Today is like his 6th day at work. So he's going to have some potential, not a lot of experience. So it's going to be about a year and a half to get him up to speed. And I'm finding that my business model works better when I get folks without experience. I don't want it that way. I want some folks with some experience because it takes a long time to bring them up to speed. So I have another person that's supposed to come in next week. A person who's a graduate of the University of New Hampshire, not a lot of experience, but it's what I can do at this point. I cannot afford to bring people on with experience, unfortunately. So that person comes in. I still have more positions to fill. I still have to fill what we're calling the grants coordinator position. I have an offer out there. It's been out there for over a week, and we have not settled on that yet. So I'm working with HR to see if we can come up with a salary that this person could live with to bring this person on board. And then we have the education, training, and outreach position, which is an important position for us. And we can't even get to that because we just, with budget, with the class and comp study, with all the stuff that we're doing, we just said, we can't deal with this. We just deal with this sometime after the first of the year. It's not that we don't need the position and we can spare it, but everybody is so busy training new folks, dealing with everything that's on the table, that we can't even get to that until after the first of the year. So we just have that kind of hanging out there. So hopefully we can get some folks in the office and kind of get them settled. I know it's going to take a while, but we're moving. We're moving to getting ourselves back. So one of the things that we did do as well is that in preparation for any emergency, disaster, or crisis that may befall us, where we don't have enough folks on staff, we have talked to Anne Arundel County, and they're going to supply some personnel to help us get through these type of issues and crisis. However, if it affects Annapolis and Anne Arundel, we reached out to Baltimore, where they can send some folks up. So we have some contingencies in place, but the best thing for us to do is get folks on the floor, get them trained up, and get them doing the good work that we normally do day in and day out.
I think we all recognize that you have a revolving door. You bring them in, and this is your business model, and you train them up, and then they move on to bigger and better. And most of that bigger and better is salary related. I mean, we've seen it for years now. So my question is your business model the one that is most effective? Or is the barrier the salary? And I'm glad Ms. Hopkins is in the room now, because we're at it, in my mind, and I hope yours also, we're at an urgent level here, where we're down to 3 people when there should be 7. And you've lost any number of candidates because we can't pay them comparable salaries to bring them here. And the comp and class study obviously didn't tell us this, or didn't make the recommendation, and maybe it was something I missed, but I don't think they made a recommendation that we should increase these salaries so that we can not only get people, but keep them.
Just the funny thing about the folks that come through OEM is that they like Annapolis, right? They develop a kinship in Annapolis. They would want to stay here. And, you know, if I had the power to, when they come into my office and say, hey, look, like the last two, the Naval Academy has made me an offer. We like it here. We want to stay here. I can't give them a counteroffer. I can't do it. And they go over to better employment. And I think not all the time it's about money, but if I could get them close to where they are and they like it here, they enjoy coming to work here, they enjoy serving the citizens of Annapolis, then that would make a difference. But I'm unable to do that. I don't have those tools, you know. Now, you asked about my business model. That's my business model because that's the only one I can have that works for me. I would love to hire experienced people. I would love to be in the competition with these other officers of emergency management in the region, but I can't. So I have to more or less get people with basic knowledge, skill, and abilities, but no experience, and bring them up to speed. And then I know that I may have them, if I'm lucky, for 2 years, maybe 3, before they go to the Naval Academy, before they go to the Department of Defense, before they go to NSA, before they go to Capitol Hill, and before they go to the National Capital Region. And that's
And NOAA.
That's where they go.
And NOAA.
And all.
Well, I hope we don't have to become part of the solution. I hope that staff will recognize, and whatever we need to do to help your position, it is too vital to ignore it. We need to do something about your ability to hire and retain staff in OEM. And I'm saying this for Ms. Buckland, for Ms. Hopkins, Mr. Malinoff should be listening, and the mayor and I are already having this discussion. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you for being here, Director Simmons, and thank you for sharing even more than what we initially asked you for.
And if I could say one
Not
last
more
thing.
than I asked for.
Well, no, I mean, more than we expected to ask you for, perhaps.
And if I can, Mr. Chair, if I could just say one last thing, I just want to thank the efforts of the Deputy Director, Dave Mandel, and the Senior Emergency Management Planner, M.K. Seborowski. They're very, very talented. They're doing double duty without complaint, and they do anything that they can to move our agency forward and take care of the citizens of Annapolis. They certainly, with their talent, skill, and ability, could leave here if they wanted and make a lot more money. But they have a dedication to the city of Annapolis. They do. And they stay here and they slug through whatever is in front of us, whether it's an incident or whether it's a little bit of a crisis of what we're going on now with staffing. So I just want to give them a shout out and thank them for everything that they do.
Well, we are grateful for them, for you, and for all of our city staff who we know work some very long hours sometimes. Do I see a motion to approve SA 1925?
Mr. Chair, I'll make the motion to give SA 1925 a favorable recommendation.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much for being with us, Director Simmons.
Thank you, Chair.
Up next, we have a supplemental appropriation for APD. And apologies, folks, I should have noticed that we could have made this our first one that we considered since you were already here.
It was no problem. There's lots of things to catch up on.
So this is a federal grant revenue for the state of Maryland through the Office of Justice Programs. Would you folks tell us just a little bit more about what it's going to go towards?
Yes, so this last round of grants, our PACT grant through the governor's office was reduced, which left us unable to fund a body-worn camera reviewer position, which is an important part of our body-worn camera program. So we sought other funding. The state, through the federal government, had this BJAG grant, so Burn Justice Assistance Grant. We were able to obtain it to fund that position, the body worn camera reviewer position. It's a total of $85,400 with a salary of $70,000 and then fringe added.
Do either of you have any questions?
No, sir. I'll make a motion that we give a favorable recommendation to SA 2025.
So, second.
All those in favor of a favorable recommendation on SA 20-25, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much for being here today, folks.
No problem. Thank you.
Again, apologies to make you wait in the middle there. And moving down along, we have a supplemental appropriation for our harbor master from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, and I'm particularly excited about this one. It's right in my backyard. Would you mind just stating your name for the record and then letting us know a little bit of what we're going to do with this grant?
Certainly, Beth Bellis, Harbor Master. So if you've driven over the Spotswood Bridge many times, when you look over just in front of St. Mary's, you will notice that the mooring field off of St. Mary's is often empty or sparsely populated with vessels. So this grant is aimed at reconfiguring that mooring field so that it can be more productive. At the moment, it holds a boat up to 34, 35 feet long, and the boating industry has changed quite a bit. Those size vessels are not as common, and when they are here, they prefer to be on dock. So Department of Natural Resources has graciously given us $5,000. The city will have to pay an additional $5,000 just for sort of the design and engineering as to where those mooring balls will go, provide those GPS coordinates, and then we've also applied for a second grant to actually do the work, get the work done. And those moorings will be occupied by transient customers, meaning visitors and residents of Annapolis on their boats.
But these are not the ones that you apply for and then you have more or less permanently, right? These are just for sort of, what's the time period at which someone can park their boat, these mooring balls?
So they can stay up to 2 weeks.
Okay.
There's a nightly fee. There's also a weekly fee.
Is there any interest, because as I understand what you're saying, when you reconfigure it, we're going to have more spots, is that correct?
It will probably be the same number of spots, but they'll be spaced out in such a fashion that they're going to be more productive. So right now we make a little over $250,000 on moorings, which is a lot of revenue for the amount of manpower and maintenance. It's a great moneymaker. It's also where a lot of people want to be with their boats.
Yeah.
However, that particular mooring field does less than a quarter of the productivity as a mooring that can hold up to a 55-foot boat. And so it's just become clear to us that those need to be spread out in order to do what they need to do.
Got it. So same number of spaces, but more boats, or bigger boats. Same number of spaces, bigger boats.
Initially, I think so, yeah. We haven't drilled down on that yet with the engineering firm, but that's the goal.
Okay. Well, I would just encourage you guys to make sure we're not getting rid of any slips for small boats. If we're expanding them and keeping the same number, that's good. And also that we're not getting rid of any for residents in favor of transient ones. But it sounds like neither of those things are happening here. So
Correct. We are not getting rid of any annual moorings.
wonderful. Any other questions?
I do have a question, Mr. Chair. Ms. Bellis, you said that this was for the planning?
Correct. The design and engineering as to where those GPS coordinates would be placed.
So is there a CIP item that will get you additional funding if you don't get the other grant?
As I understand it, even if something's grant funded, it still needs to be in the CIP. Because we don't have this grant, but we should get news on it within the next 6 months. In my view, it should go in the CIP the next cycle. So we'll work on that. But this is a little project. The architecture and engineering is very little. It's $5,000 from the city and $5,000 from Department of Natural Resources. But that's a good point, and we'll make sure it gets in the CIP moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I have just one other comment on this. I noticed it says that there's no match required for the grant, and from my understanding from you, it sounds like we are going to spend $5,000, even if that match is not required. And I have no problem with that, but it would be good if there's a way for that to be reflected in our notes.
So when you apply for a grant, the grantor would demand that there be a match.
Right.
That wasn't the case in this situation. And when we applied for that grant, we fully expected to be able to fund everything with the $5,000. So we were a little surprised when we got bids back at 10.
Got it.
So I'm not sure if we should change that because it feels like that would be the grantor requiring the match.
No, I understand. It's technically right. The grantor is not requiring match. I'm just saying if by making the supplemental appropriation from a grant, we are also leading the city to spend some additional funds out of its existing budget, it would be good to just have that reflected in our notes.
Sure, and to be fair, to be completely transparent, our intention was to apply for a second 5K because DNR is quite generous with them. But after we received this one, they stopped giving them altogether, and we were very surprised.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate that transparency.
Sure.
Anything from you, Alderwoman O'Neill?
No.
All right. Do I see a motion to approve, make a favorable recommendation on SA 2125?
I'll make that recommendation, Mr. Chair. Favorable recommendation.
I'll second it.
All those in favor of a favorable recommendation on SA 2125, say aye.
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 Aye. Thank you very much
Thank you
for
very
being
much.
here. Last but not least, on our supplemental appropriations, we have some state grant revenue from the Maryland Department of Transportation.
Now we getting into some real money.
Yeah. Like I said, definitely not least. Good to have you today.
Marcus Moore, Director of Transportation Parking. I'd like to come to you to discuss SA 2225. Actually, it's a reset. When the governor proposed his budget for FY25, there was a big cut in transit spending. And there was a reset, and House Bill, I believe 960, reset that. And it was supposed to be put back in, and as you can see, the explanation of what that is, Maryland Department of Transportation is the reallocation of the $339,538, bringing back up to $801,000. So we're broken down into ADA, and of course, you'll see the LU, which is the large urban, as far as the funding for our operations there. So this, you can see the description there of where it's coming from and what it's going to be used for.
I apologize, Director. I'm not seeing a description of what it's going to be used for.
Actually, the supplemental allocation appropriates additional $339,538 from MDOT, the Maryland Department of Transportation, for FY25. MDOT, the large urban grant, the state increased the grant from $462,438 to the amount of the $339,538 to bring it to $801,971.
Got it.
The local match.
Can you describe to us what this is going to go towards? I mean, this is a great $340,000. What is your department intending to spend it on?
So this is our match for our, we have our ADA service, which is complimentary paratransit. And then we're considered, even though we're not large, the large urban. So it's our regular fixed route operation.
Got it. So ADA and fixed route.
Right. This one is just large urban, the fixed route. That's correct.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions?
I have a question, of course. In light of the current political atmosphere, last year it was cut. This year it's increased. Are you beginning to think about future cuts?
That's really a good question. And what House Bill 960 says, it's going to fund at a constant level, no matter who's in the legislative body of authority. Of course, the other departments like our Transportation Association of Maryland, APTA, American Public Transportation Association, other lobbyists will always be lobbying for what we're considered, let's look at just our state, we're considered a locally operated transit system. So there's still always going to be the lobbyists of looking at how we keep our funding levels where they are and not decrease where we're looking for more from our general fund, from our finance, from the city. So we should be, unless Director Dickinson can answer any differently, okay with this level, that it should not reduce from where we are now in future years, FY26 and beyond.
And that level is at the 800,000 level?
I believe that is correct. Is that that's where the minimum, that I should have brought House Bill 960 to show exactly how it spells out, but when I get back to the office, I can send that to you, that circular that explains that.
Thank you. Ms. Dickinson, do you want to add?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, I think it sealed it at the levels that we got in '24.
That's correct.
And originally, we thought we were going to be reduced. So this is adding back, but remember that the costs increase every year because we have to pay more to our employees, and the operating costs and maintenance costs are more. So the things that I brought to your attention during the budget process last year about the increasing transportation costs and the flat line of the state funding is going to be an issue over time. We continue to provide excess parking revenues as a transfer to the fund for operations, and as right now we're fine, but in future years we're going to have to address how to meet that gap.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
Anything else? Nope. In that case, do I see a motion to recommend favorably SA 2225?
Mr. Chair, I'll move favorable recommendation for SA 2225.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Supplemental appropriation approved. I know we have R5124 on the agenda that we're looking at, but I believe our city clerk has informed us we did pass that at the last meeting. So we're good to go on that. Which moves us on to R5324, changes to executive pay ranges. Do we have Manager Hopkins here to talk about it, or Assistant City Manager? Who wants to jump in?
I think Ms. Hopkins is coming up.
Yeah, we are both here. So this was the pay ranges and structure that ended up being included in the recommendations from the consultants that performed the class and comp study. I did send, we had a lot of questions about comparators, so I had pulled some information that got sent yesterday, so hopefully you guys have that as a reference. Just as a reminder, in some sense, there's two pieces to the recommendation from the consultants. The first, and I think from their perspective, the more important of them is the move to an open range structure. And then the second part of that is what are the actual limits and the internals of how it's constructed. But I think they view those as sort of, in some sense, separate but related recommendations. This particular legislation and ultimately the recommendation they gave us incorporates the two. But I do want to point out that it kind of contains those two pieces.
And that second piece would come in the format of payrolls.
You'll need to pull that closer. Okay. All right.
So what doesn't appear in legislation, because that's not the process for it, is changes to our rules and regulations. And so an element of what we are going to advance to you is many changes that were both recommended and overdue, quite frankly, in changes to our rules and regulations, which we refer to as our payrolls. And so within that would be included some guidance around executive pay as well. Because the goal here is not to create an open range that you can just have carte blanche opportunities available to you. We are trying to do the good work as we transition to the new scale for our other employees as well. So as an example, our N scale and our A scale with individuals, employees that had 20 or more years of experience or were in the maximum pay rate of the grade because of their seniority, they landed in step 14. And so now we advertise a pay range that only goes to the maximum of step 14 so that we don't affect internal equity around employees that have been here a long time and start hiring people in the highest part of those ranges. So we're doing some range control, maximum range controls from the get-go. The other component of that is for our non-represented employees and our AFSCME employees, separate and apart from what we do through public safety, which is a hierarchical system. You come in at the lowest level and advance your way up. What we are also doing and have been doing for years and years is anybody that's hired above step 1 requires a justification for that. And you know as well that for executive pay, when individuals are hired, their salary must also be approved by the council. And in that, there are those controls that are available to us all to make sure that we are using good criteria. We are paying attention to how we're paying otherwise compensating employees already here. In the executive level, and I have some exposure and experience with this, having worked for Anne Arundel County and moved most employees to open ranges once upon a time. They've shifted away from that for a number of represented positions, but not for your non-represented and your executive level positions, all the appointees. And so what you do is you have fiscal controls around that. You say, okay, this year, that increase will be X. So when there's a performance review, we're still anniversary date driven around when there's increases in pay. And so that puts some confinement on that movement through an open range. So it's not wide open, uncontrolled, not mindful of what the city's finances are. And so with the pay rules, we expect to show you what those elements are as well as be mindful of what the city's finances are in offering those. So when you look at a wider range or you look at the proposal for an executive pay scale, that's planning ahead as well. That's good planning ahead. And so you're not looking at compensating incoming directors at a level that just sort of outdistances what we've already compensated our executive leadership as.
May I interrupt you with just one specific question? When you talk about planning ahead, because that makes a lot of good sense to me, is there an idea of how far ahead we are planning for this, right? Is this are these pay ranges meant to encompass us through 2028 or through 2032, or do we have a date on that?
So I don't know that I'm the one to answer that question, so.
I want to make sure I understand what the question is what I think I heard was, what are the plans for or intention around revisiting what the scale itself looks like, and how long are we intending to hold to these values for the start and stop? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, that's about what I was asking, yes.
So one of the recommendations from PRM was to sort of set up a more intentional time frame for just overall in the city, how often you would revisit things. I don't think that we have any particular intention to single out the executive range to go more often, for example, than that. Based on what those comparisons are, there's no reason for me to believe that we will fall behind the market anytime soon. So I don't think we're going to have any particular incentive to somehow bump up re-looking at the executive range.
We also
apart
are
from anyone
pretty,
else.
I'm sorry, Vicki,
No,
let me
no.
talk over you. We're also very good in this city, and I'm, you know, I've come from other jurisdictions as well. I feel solid around what the city does in terms of pay relationships, where we have granted cost of living increases that have been consistent across the board. We try when we do collective bargaining to really pay attention to that. If we're doing scale adjustments, it's because the market has done something wild out there, and we know we're going to need to make those changes to keep up. But for the most part, we have good pay philosophy around construction of our scale, the impact of adjustments, and that we carry them through. I know Alderwoman Finlayson was very much involved in and brought to us interest-based bargaining, which did that, but I also feel that the city has a long history of making sure we're looking at the relationship of pay between scales. And that matters to us. And so we know that it's a headlight if you do something that is considerably different with particular groups. And so we're even trying with the pay rules to show that mindfulness and that consistency in the way that's described. And I know that maybe also to address the concerns around OEM's situation, we know that the way the pay language is right now in the code that grants only one increase connected to your anniversary date isn't serving us. We know that we do need to have the opportunity to make pay corrections and to provide ways to address some issues that we know we have for various reasons, but to be more intentional about what's the criteria. So it's not just a matter of somebody gives a persuasive argument and somebody else does not. And that then you then have inconsistencies in citywide in your comparison. So all of those things matter, and we just want to make sure we have good basic guidelines to as to what gets put in the mix for consideration.
Do either of you want to jump in with questions? I got a bunch.
Are you calling me? It's my
If you
turn.
want to, go ahead.
This is a very complicated piece of legislation. I have concerns about a number of different things. The range that is given in the resolution, and I find it interesting that all three pieces have been lumped together in the staff report. How many of our employees are at this low range today? And maybe you answered that in another setting, because I know we had a discussion in rules, but we chose to postpone it because we had a lot of questions. But do we know how many of our EO 3 through 6 employees are on the low range?
Where they fit within that range?
Or within that range?
I think the fiscal note says that all of our employees are currently within these ranges.
Okay.
So, yeah, it says,
Yes.
given the current salaries of the positions, all current salaries, are within these proposed pay ranges. So we're not automatically giving an increase to someone because their pay scale is changing.
Well, what has raised everyone's attention is the high end.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to get a perspective on where we are and where we could be, and then the fiscal impact on where we could be. And you, most of you who know me know that, I support the employees and their enhancements in every possible way.
So as you know, Alderman Finlayson, we've already transitioned to a new scale because we went back and addressed adding back N19 and N20 to take care of executive leadership. So that transition has already happened in terms of giving a pay increase similar to what the members of the A scale or the N scale, it's really an N scale comparison here, but they're equivalent, got. And so the individuals at that level most individuals are sitting at the maximum of the pay range because they're executive leaders with a lot of experience. And, we tend to bring our leaders in at a pretty high level because we hire people with considerable experience. And so almost fully, not entirely, but most individuals are sitting at we're sitting at the maximum of the FY24 scale. When that conversion happened. And then we're talking about a merit increase. You're talking about a performance pay increase once they're in that transitional range.
But I think to your question, I was conferring with my colleague here, and obviously, Tricia, we haven't spoken about this, so I'm talking off the top of my head a little bit. But that salary information, my understanding is that that's essentially public information. And if you would like a summary that simply by title, here's the titles and here's what that range is under the proposed scale, that is certainly something we would be able to provide.
I think that would be beneficial.
Yeah.
We used to, years ago, during the budget process, would get that information by title, by department. Actually, back in the day, we got everybody's names and their salaries as part of the budget. So anyway, that would be very helpful. I guess the other thing that is complicated is how we came up with, and I'm looking at the staff report, how we came up with who is EO3, EO4, EO5, and EO6. I find it interesting that our deputy city manager and the deputy manager for resilience and sustainability have salaries less than the people they supervise, the department heads. Is that an error or is that an intent? And I don't understand how that works.
Neither of those positions supervise department heads. And so that information was taken into account by the consultants in our review with them of the assignment of grades.
Well, they surely take on responsibilities for departments.
But they're not in a supervisory chain. They're not guiding, coaching, doing performance reviews, responsible for assignment direction. It's I don't want to speak out of turn, but I've witnessed this more as a collaborative role that both of those positions perform in city government. Certainly they, in the absence of the city manager, would take on the duties of the city manager in the interim. But in terms of a permanent assignment of supervisory authority, they do not have that over directors.
Well, I understand your justification. I don't agree with it. I have a serious problem. If the city manager is out of the state, the deputy, the assistant, is responsible for everything that's in the hands of the city manager. So I'm not sure why we're suggesting that the assistant city manager doesn't have responsibilities for departments. It may not be in the code as stated, but it's a reality. And maybe the departments are offices and not departments, such as the Office of Community Services. But there is a direct responsibility for that office. So I'm very uncomfortable with that piece of this legislation, and I will not support it until there is some better planning.
So may I offer this? This is very classic in just about every situation. You have the number one person who's out for a period of time, you have somebody else who's acting in their absence to fulfill the duties while they're absent. That is what we call an acting out of class situation. We would have compensation for that individual in the absence of the individual who normally would perform those duties. And so it's not that you don't have a mechanism for compensation, it's that when it's not regular, reoccurring, and a principal duty and primary duty of that position, that you would not reclassify on the basis of occasional filling in kind of responsibility. Use your mechanism of acting out of class to fulfill that compensation.
I'm not sure, I just want to jump in on this one. I'm not sure I completely agree with you, Alderwoman Finlayson, but I think you make a really good point in that if we do look at this comparison with different jurisdictions, we see kind of a range of how this is done, right? And looks like in Prince George's County, they are higher level than the directors mostly, whereas in Baltimore County, or actually I can't figure out Baltimore County's one, but in Anne Arundel County, they're equal. So it does seem like this is a worthwhile point of discussion of there's not one clear way that it's done in all of our peer jurisdictions, it looks like to me.
So I do know in some of the larger counties that it's not only important, but a lot of times necessary to have that separation, to have kind of a funnel piece at that deputy level, at that assistant level, because in Anne Arundel County in particular, they have it set up with core groups. And so your land use related departments will funnel through that core group. You might have your administrative group separately. And so that's more about functional span of control for somebody operating a very, very large organization. I'm not suggesting that that model wouldn't work here as well. I'm just offering what's the difference in comparison between how they're functioning at the county level and those comparators and how we're functioning at the City of Annapolis level.
I think, and I understand the practical justification. I think more of my concern deals with respect and accountability. We tend to give people titles that are not sufficient for the jobs that we expect them to do. We are constantly changing and adding to, we never take away anything, but constantly adding to the level of responsibility without their total accountability. And so I have a very difficult time understanding this. And like I said, I can't support this with the directors falling beneath. That is not our intent, has not been our intent when we created these positions. Okay? We can go to what the book says, but I'm speaking from the senior member on the council. Our intent was line of supervision, line of authority, and line of, I don't want to say respect, there's a better word, but there is some need for, I can't think of the word, but there's something that's lacking. So, thank you.
Could you describe, Ms. Hopkins, some more about why the decision is made to have all of our department directors be the same grade?
So you'll see that in some jurisdictions. Prince George's County is a good example of that. They tend to name all of their directors, and then the particular department follows that. So they're fairly flat in that relationship. Other jurisdictions are not like that. So I think some of that comes about as how do you want your organization to look? And since it's not consistent across jurisdictions, we looked at what should we do here? You know, that we're coming from a flat organization, meaning that all directors tended to be in grade 20, with the exception of police and fire. Police and fire only gets distanced from that same core as has been impacted by the market around that and what other jurisdictions were doing. Again, back to that pay philosophy, we tend to carry it through to same positions, like all law enforcement, all fire and EMS service, and then all the other directors have been together. So it's not that it's required to happen that way when you see the comparators don't all follow the same direction, but it's one of those decisions you need to come to for yourself in terms of what you want your organization to look like. And so it was not without a lot of conversation, quite honestly, but that's the direction that we took.
I guess just to dig down.
May I give you a little bit of history?
Sure.
Because we deliberately decided to put all of our directors on the same level for equity purposes. Our directors were all over the map, and there was no specific pattern for paying them. Mm-hmm. And so we put all of our directors on 20. That was the category. And at that time, we had HR as a department, and we had IT as a department. And several of our departments were headed by women whose salaries were significantly, maybe I shouldn't say significant, but they were less than their male counterparts. And so we brought everybody to the same level. And that was very deliberate by this council, the council that was then, to give equity and parity to all of our directors. Now, of course, when they come in, they have benefits that are offered to them to attract them, but the base salary was to be the same. Conscious decision by the council.
In this, if we move forward with these, having the directors all be at the same grade, which I appreciate getting to know about how that came about before, is the thought that under these current pay scales, it would be typical for some of the directors to come in at a level higher than others, in recognizing, things will vary depending on experience and stuff. But should we expect that as a general rule, take for instance, the director of finance should be or will be higher than the director of, let's say, OEM, just because I see you both in the room?
So a lot of that will be a function of what the pay is and what we're in the state of Maryland, so we are not going to be in a situation where we ask people what they're paid. We will be in a negotiation situation to go about determining what is going to be an acceptable rate of pay coming in. And so it's more a function of that than making deliberate decisions that we're only going to go this high for somebody in X position compared to somebody in Y position. It will most likely be more a function of the person's experience and talents that they bring and how much they fit and benefit the city at the decision point.
I think my concern is to Alderman Finlayson's point that we could still end up with a situation, and I expect that we will end up with a situation where these directors are still paid wildly different numbers, right? Somebody's making 170 and somebody's making 230,000, and it could be for a totally good reason of, this person's managing more, this person has more experience. But what we've then done if we implement these is we've just taken that out of the hands of the council entirely. And we've gone from having the ability to say with a somewhat more narrow band, we expect that ITS is going to be higher than RNP or whatever. And instead we've just kind of said, okay, they're all theoretically the same, but in practice they're not going to be the same, and we won't have any control over whether that's for a good reason or not as good reason. So
it makes very good sense for us when making any hiring decision. And so I feel like the gatekeeper in this is the city manager, right? So the executive leadership is driven by the decisions of the city manager ultimately. We use a really good, robust process here. We make sure we have diverse panels that do interviews. We generally tend to use good experts to do first round of interviews. Get your your candidates down to a reasonable level for consideration from the city manager, and sometimes the mayor, depending on the position. And that then becomes an important part of decision-making. What we do, well, the part I didn't mention was looking at the pay of all other compatriots. I do it now. It's necessary justification for any step above step one decision that comes in now. We look at how others are being paid in similarly situated positions, so we don't bring somebody in that's making more than their supervisor would be making, for example, or that's not relative in terms of what experience and talents they're bringing in compared to those that are already here. So that is something that should go in the mix even at that level.
Could you talk a little bit more about the fire chief and chief of police positions and how in past I know we had them at a higher level, but my understanding is under this new system they will be in the same grade as the others, and any impact that you think that might have on their ability to find qualified candidates for that?
So that shouldn't be impactful because, again, that range is inclusive. And I feel that still gives you that level of movement there. Again, we're talking about making sure that we have an executive leadership that's comparable to one another.
But typically, because the market for police and fire chiefs is different than the market for other directors, we would expect that those are going to be higher than the average of the others, correct?
Correct.
So then why would we not reflect that? Why would we not, if we know that the average for those two is going to be higher than the average for the other ones, why wouldn't we have a range that is centered on those averages?
Again, it's a pay philosophy decision ultimately, and that's not equivalent across all comparators. That distinction is not equivalent across all comparators.
Could you explain some more about why you like that philosophy? I know you've talked about it some, but it just I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it.
Why I like it?
Hey, or why the consultants
I
or
think
whoever.
What we've taken into account here is, as Alderman Finlayson has said, we have some history. We've taken into account our history in that consideration.
And may I add something? All of our directors have professional knowledge, skills, and when we are hiring, we are looking for the best in those categories. I would say that we are currently looking for a finance director.
We are.
And the skill set that we are looking for can't be comparable to the skill set that we're looking for in the next police chief or the next fire chief, because it is so very different. There are some of our constituents who would say that the public works director is the most important person in the city, because they rely very heavily on the services that our public entity provides, the water, the sewer, the like. And there are others who think that public safety is the number one. And we know that the community feels that way. We've seen it in surveys. But it's very difficult to say one is more important than the other, or more skills required, or the like. So, and that's why I started earlier by saying this is very complicated to do because we're looking at so many different factors. And we do have a tremendous history to fall back on as to how we got to where we are. So I was hoping that might be helpful to you.
Thank you. Yeah, Alderman O'Neill.
Thank you. So in the whole plan, and I was pulling out my notes from when we had the consultant in here talking, one of the things that I have been grappling with the most is that this plan doesn't, you used the word respect earlier, but it doesn't benefit somebody that's been here for a long time. And I think that there's something to be said about the loyalty. And when you look at somebody who's been here for 10, 12, 15 years, and they have received their, yearly allotments of COLA or whatever the case may be, and their pay grade movement. But I had a conversation with a manager in one of the departments who was hiring personnel, and in order to bring that person on to fill a position, that person is making like $2,000 less than the manager because of the pay rate. And I think that I don't want to go and give everybody that's been here for 10 years, a $20,000 raise. We don't have the budget for that. But I think that we need to be taking a look at those scenarios, whereas we have somebody that's been here for a long time, they've gotten this, all of a sudden we're in this day and age where I probably have the very same skills that you had 10 years ago, but I am coming on at a much higher rate. And frankly, it's very close to what your rate is, having given the city 10 years of service. I don't know if we can make changes to that. I know that when I worked for a company and they said, well, we can't give you raises. And I said, how about an extra 2 days off? For me, that was a benefit that made me feel appreciated and understood that, or, maybe I get to have a flex schedule or whatever the case may be. And I don't know if that's something that we currently do, but I see that as an issue. I see, departments that are struggling to hire new people because they want to retain the people that they have and not push them out the door because they're going to be training somebody that's making equal or sometimes more than them.
I will not agree to that.
So let me unpack that a little bit. Having worked in government for a very long time, you see this. You see it's a buyer's market. It's the employee's market. Now it's an employer's market. And the time in which individuals enter the market can lead to some of those differences too. I am absolutely thrilled that we got rid of longevity steps. I can't tell you what that has done for us to address most of what you're talking about.
I'm sorry, what was the name of the thing you just said you're thrilled we got rid of? Could you repeat that?
Longevity steps. On the prior scales, we had almost half the scale dedicated to slow downs based on years of service. And so that really contributed heavily to the impact of slow movement for people who've been here longer. And so you have individuals being hired at the maximum step and then sit there for the next increase, or the maximum step that's not a longevity step, and then have to sit there for the requisite number of years in order to advance to the next step. That was affecting our ability to hire people when they saw they weren't going to get a performance-based increase because they're now waiting for longevities to mature. And it also affected our ability to do exactly what you're talking about, to properly have distance between people that have been here a while and people that are incoming. Because when you get into a scarcity situation, which we've already heard about today, when you're in scarcity and you can't find the talent, you're really pinched to pay more for that talent, which then affects people who came in at a different time and came at a time when that was more balanced and matched based on their years of service. And I don't have a complete answer for that in terms of how to fix it in a government environment, because we also have, a lot of fiscal responsibility in making sure that we just don't overblow our budget, which we know is significantly tilted towards our personnel costs. And so it's not always the best of both worlds, but we are trying with the payrolls as well to address that, so we're not restricted to, once you're in your grade assignment, you're going to have to wait until your next performance review. At least now, every employee will see a performance review and an opportunity to move based on their performance at once a year. That's big. That's really big for us as a city. It's not just about funding that, it's about responsibly recognizing the impact of keeping good employees who have multiple talents, and you don't have to keep training up individuals to come in and ultimately perform a portion of what somebody who left was doing. And I really think that went a long way for our, both our attraction and our retention.
I'll just say, I'm very excited about that. I think that's a really good portion.
It's a good outcome, and all 4 of our bargaining units shifted to that. So that shows you that we went in with a good approach to it. We went in with a great respect for our employee population, and we feel that providing that future look, because that's what it is, individuals that transition to say they were at the maximum of the pay and they end up at step 14, it goes up to 19. So you can forecast, I've got movement every year towards that. We had 70% of our employees, 69 to 70% of our employees were sitting in those longevity steps. That's a demonstration of loyalty right there, because they at least have 7 years of experience with the city if they're in those longevity steps. We have long-term employees that we have no desire to lose. And I feel that was a very deliberate and important change for us to make. But we also need to fix things that are really super out of balance. I can't fix them all at once. You know, this opens things up now for the future.
Right. Thank you. I do have one more question. It's not necessarily linked to this, but it's a little bit linked to this. I have had some frustrations because in the FY25 budget, the council passed, and I believe are budgeted for several positions in different departments that have not been filled because they are being told that they have to wait until this is. I don't understand that if we budgeted for them, and
we
that we would
don't have a
make the change.
title or a grade assignment in which to place those positions.
And why don't we?
We can fill them as an employment agreement, but then if you go out there to try to attract individuals under an employment agreement, then you can't offer this whole array of benefits, which might be really important to those candidates. And you're probably going to have lesser pool of candidates. So that's what we're navigating. We're trying to get this forward more quickly so that we can fulfill all those expectations and be ready for them. But until this is passed, we don't have official titles for those positions to fill.
So the compromise for us has been starting the journey on just the inside of, let's make sure we've got the position description together. Let's make sure up until the time you hit the button to release it to the public, because that does require us to have an official job title to use. Everything up to then is internal, and so we're trying to get ready so that when that approval is there, then we're ready to release.
Yeah, we won't be delaying.
Well, I can say there's at least one position that I know of off the top of my head that is hurting us and it's hurting our city, and then that is the short-term rental management position.
I'm sorry, what was that?
The short-term rental management position that we raised fees for in order to cover, and I thought we allocated that position. We are every day faced with a department that doesn't have the personnel to handle that, and illegal short-term rentals going on in the city, rental issues, violation of their licensing. And every day that we wait is just another day that our city residents are being hurt. And they don't understand that we're waiting because we have to give them a title. Like, we know what the title is. Can we move forward with that?
I think maybe because I completely share what you're saying. Is it a possibility that we could break out some of those title creation pieces of this from some of the I'll just say, more controversial parts of it, parts that maybe we just want to spend a little bit more time with and fast track the bill to actually create those positions? Is it, to any of the three of you, is it your thought that we could get that done a little more quickly than the rest of this? Is that possible?
That is a good question. I would need to consult with the Office of Law about the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
Mike?
What?
I'm so sorry. That's a good question. I would need to consult with the Office of Law about the mechanics about how to do that. But I agree that's worth asking.
My suggestion on the mechanics, and of course I would defer to our Office of Law staff, is if there really are parts of, and I think it would be in one of these two that we're talking about today, that we kind of all agree what the position titles are. It's not something that anybody on the council is going to have significant disagreement on.
Yeah.
You could have an amendment to strike those portions from the resolution that they're currently in, and then we could submit a alternate resolution that we could then hopefully get passed quickly, maybe even by suspending the rules to get that done.
Mr. Chair, are you making a recommendation that we postpone action, or are you requesting that we postpone?
I will, but I got more questions. So.
Okay. All right. Well, that's fine.
May I
have,
ask a question?
Yeah.
Is it possible to find out what are the most concerning parts of that? So we would need to know
Sure.
what we're sorting,
Right.
honestly.
And I would say it's probably going to be focused on the positions that were added in the FY25 budget process that I thought when we added them, we budgeted for them so that there would be a line item for that position, because we didn't pass them just with the idea that we wanted to just add willy-nilly more people.
So the
We passed them
expectation
with-
is to advance them.
Right.
Okay.
We passed it so that those positions could start being effective in the city.
Yeah, and ideally, or theoretically at least, everybody already voted for it except me. So it should be hopefully something that the council would have no problem getting done. So I really like that idea.
May I add,
Go ahead.
maybe in the budget process, when we are talking about adding positions, and we did do quite a bit of kind of wholesale additions this year
Yeah.
for 2025, that we get a clear understanding from staff what it's going to take. Because our expectation is that those positions will be filled immediately and we'll be just sailing along. And the reality is it's going to take 3 months or 6 months. And I think it would be important to tell us that.
Yeah.
You know, so that we have in our minds an idea of when we can implement whatever it is we want to implement.
And honestly, this year we did a citywide, just a reminder, we did a citywide classification and compensation study. And so that meant everything was intended to be looked at so that it works together, that it's applying the same criteria, it's using the same assessment process, that what comes out has some alignment for internal comparison that makes sense. So I do feel that that's not going to be an annual event, and therefore hopeful that the ultimate changes that are suggested in the budget would be more amenable to faster action. My concern is that, and I'm just going to speak from an HR seat here, is that all of that comes to HR, and particularly me, kind of in final hour form. And so, you know, in order to assess them and to make a good decision, get a job description together, get an appropriate grade assignment, good title, that's not an overnight sensation when you have several of them to do, and other work that for yourself is about either collective bargaining or budget process at the same time. So we do have an expectation from the consultants about giving us evaluative tools that will allow us to do that more quickly and work out an arrangement so that it gets incorporated better with the process. But again, I hope you understand that making choices about what a title should be and how a position is compensated deserves to be evaluated using consistent criteria that's otherwise used for every other position.
I don't think we're asking that you make short shrift of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I'm just suggesting that we look ahead, and, you know, we pretty much decided what we were going to do in May, even though we didn't approve the budget until June. And maybe staffing is an issue for HR.
Yeah.
Because
We're also waiting on a title.
Yeah, so, you know, and
I can offer that we did at Anne Arundel County when I was there, is that we did our classification and compensation work in the fall. And so if a department was going to recommend the addition of a position, or was coming from whatever direction, might have been council as well, that was studied in the fall, so it could be incorporated and identified in the budget and was ready for action when the budget was approved.
But how about the departments? What's their role? The directors, their role in writing the description or selecting the title, or instead of it all falling on HR, I would think that it would fall in part to the professionals in those departments who work and know the day-to-day operations and
I
needs.
have a wonderful cooperative relationship with many department people. I don't want to make you believe that doesn't happen.
No, and I'm not suggesting, I'm just trying to find a way to expedite it.
The subject matter experts, they don't write the job description, but we work collaboratively to create it. What's nice about our format is we know the format. It's about using that format. The major part of their work is identifying the job duties. And then we wordsmith it together. We used to have to do that, also going through the Civil Service Board process.
Excuse me?
Yeah. I was just saying, so we're, we have been, let me turn my mic on. So we've officially been discussing our 5324, but what I was realizing is that I think a lot of what Alderwoman O'Neill was talking about with positions that were added in the FY25 budget is really covered in our 5424. Well, I think we've been lumping those together a little bit, but actually, I have not heard any, again, I'll use the word controversy, but I think it's really not quite that much at all around our 5424. And I think potentially advancing that, if we feel comfortable with that today, could allow us to address the concerns around that were just brought up around the positions that were added in the last budget, because they're not executive positions. So my suggestion, and I'd love to hear debate from my colleagues on this, is that we postpone our 5324, because I still have questions that I want to ask about it. And we move on to our 5424, which we may actually, in our last 15 minutes, be able to advance today. How would the two of you feel about that?
I'm comfortable with postponing action. I agree, there's still questions
Yeah.
that have to be answered.
Regarding our 5324, I'll just say there are a couple things I would like to maybe hear before our next meeting, and they went out of my head that quickly. So I will follow up with our finance department about it, or whoever's most appropriate.
Okay.
But can we get a motion to postpone our 5324 until the next meeting of the finance committee?
I'll move postponement of R53.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So moved. All right, let's move on to R5424.
Could I offer?
Oh, yes.
Vicki was trying to say something.
I'm sorry.
You could.
It's actually related, I think, more to R54. But the thing I was just going to point out is that whole discussion about that longer process mostly applies when you're creating a brand new class. If you've got an existing class, and one of the things you see in R54 in particular is a simplification in some cases of job titles, which helps you to be able to add positions without having to make changes to the underlying classification structure. That is easier because you're not going through that. And I just wanted to make sure that was on the table.
That's a really important point. Because a lot of what happens is we like to give things the very specific title for the function that you're after. The two things that I feel are really a good progressive points for us is moving away from the Civil Service Board having to vet all of these. That adds so much more time to the process. The creating a generic, we'll call it house, for a lot of these descriptions allows us to then, like inspectors and engineers and program managers or program specialists, allows us to say, hey, council, you want that program, you want us to have it, we already have a title, we will just adjust the job description because we can now with just the human resources manager, director, wherever we end up, and the city manager making those decisions about what the job description includes. And then we can tweak that language so that it's addressing some of the concerns of the council and others so that we're going after the kind of candidates that meet that identified need and can just give greater description to it, but still stay within the confines of the house, of the job description, or of the title itself. And I feel like that's a really positive move for the city. And the more we do that, the more we are laying ourselves up for the potential of getting out of the gate faster when you've made decisions in the course of a budget process, or even later when the need comes up and we say, you know what, we got a place for that. But let's just add these responsibilities to it so people are clearly knowing what they're going to be doing when they come here.
So we are on R5424, I believe, at this point. And so I would just open the floor to questions from my colleagues. Yeah, go ahead.
I have some concerns. My first question is, were the department heads asked to weigh in on the changes of the names of their positions?
Yes.
Because I'm hearing they weren't. So that is why I'm asking the question.
So
Folks
hopefully-
learned about it either through the legislation or through the presentations that were given to them. I think that was one of the options. I appreciate the career ladders throughout, but I have serious concerns about title changes within departments without the department's coordination, professional input, and the like. And I guess the one position that is of serious note is our staff person for the city council. We created that position specifically for what we needed as a city council. And in this legislation, the title is, what is it? Legislative assistant. Legislative administrative assistant, which opens the door for all kinds of things. When the intent totally was to have an assistant to the city council. So I feel very strongly, we were not advised on this, but the change is here. And I suspect that there may be some other deputy positions that are added, not deputies, but moving from deputy to assistant. And I think I saw one moving from assistant to deputy. You know, at one time, we decided as a council we weren't having any deputies. And then slowly, deputies kind of got back into the scope of things. And now we're moving. And there should be some explanation as to what the difference is, what the fiscal impact is, and what the professional impact is, if there's any. Or maybe it's just a title change, but there needs to be some explanation. as to why those changes took place.
So am I correct in hearing two questions from you, Alderwoman Finlayson? One is, why are some positions that are assistants getting turned to deputies? And why was the city council associate changed to legislative administrative assistant? Are those your two questions?
And there are several others title changes without explanation for them. We have a pretreatment coordinator and a GIS specialist, which I thought we already had, but
Those
you
were
know,
additions to the
there are some
budget.
title
Those
changes.
two came into the budget for FY25.
They came into the budget.
Yeah.
And maybe a notation so that we know what change because of the budget has to be made.
Okay,
Because that's what you're saying, right? Those two came in through the budget
they
process.
did. And I believe that notation is on the staff report.
If the entire title is in red, it's a net, that title didn't exist before. It's a totally new title.
And Ms. Hopkins is saying that came in by virtue of, well, at least the two I'm looking at, pretreatment coordinator and GIS specialist.
Correct, those are in Public Works, and those were additions.
Okay, so we have two GIS.
FY25 budget.
Then we have a GIS specialist in IT also.
No, this is a position that's kind of between the technician level, it's a GIS technician in ITS, and a GIS coordinator in ITS. This position is assigned to Public Works.
Okay.
And they work carefully and closely with getting Brian Paquin's input as well, so.
But you understand my confusion. There's a GIS here, and I thought Ms. Wampler was our GIS specialist in IT.
Well, this position is going, I can't recall off the top of my head the assignment in particular. But again, they worked to review that information with Brian Paquin, that we also have IT titles, although that's under an employment agreement in the police department. So it's not that we don't have some, not everything is central to IT, but we make sure that we are reviewing them along with our IT structure, ITS structure that we already have.
So the ones in red do or do not already have job descriptions?
They are brand new.
They're brand new. So that means that they
now have job descriptions. They've now been reviewed by the
So now they
consultant.
have job descriptions. Before we pass this, they have job descriptions?
They all that I had to work with originally was whatever was the budget justification for bringing those positions in. And then we work carefully with the departments and the consultants to get job descriptions for them.
I do want to
Okay,
be
I'm
careful,
good.
though. Not everything that's in red in that list has a completed job description, particularly when you talk about the career ladders.
Well, that would be different, yeah. The individual positions, though.
Yeah, no, I just want to make sure we're
Yeah.
clear. Not
Okay.
everything does that's in red.
I know we're running out of time. Mr. Chair, I think we should postpone action on this one also.
I do appreciate your questions and your desire to get more information. So whatever you need, please let me know. You know, I want to make sure you know and understand what kind of work we put into this already, and hopefully answer your questions.
Yeah, and I know we're grilling you today, but we do appreciate how much work there has been on the back end to this that we don't see. Could you explain on the legislative administrative assistant and how that got changed from city council associate? Because we like Kaylin a lot, we want to keep her.
There's no desire to have her go anywhere at all. It's simply that the comparators and the other organizations that are out, they tend to give it a legislative title to distinguish it from executive service. And you are the legislative body. And so I don't think it was intended to at all remove the identity from city council. In fact, it was intended to distinguish the legislative body from other assignments.
And just to be clear, that job description is not changing even if the title is, correct?
I mean, the job description is changed in to the extent that was been reviewed and
Right.
updated, but not the core duties of the position or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Did they recognize, we do have a legislative assistant?
We have the
The legislative policy.
we have the legal assistant, and we have the legislative.
What is Cynthia's title? Legislative policy analyst.
Yeah.
If an assistant would I be up under Cynthia or would I be up under Miss Regina?
See, that's part of the confusion that we've seen from day one with the position being under the city attorney as opposed to being under the city clerk. That was the original intent. So that's being changed. So I feel strongly that needs to go back to
Appreciate that.
very
It's good
clearly the
feedback.
city council.
I would support that
Associates.
as well. We can work on getting an amendment on that one.
So, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I know you have to go. So.
In our last 2 minutes, Alderwoman O'Neill, do you have anything you wanted to jump into, or should we just?
No, I will
Adjourn.
make a motion to postpone
Okay.
action on this item as well.
Thank you. All those in favor of postponing to our next Finance Committee meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much for being
Do you know
here
when
today,
that next
everybody.
meeting is?
Oh,
Next
when
week.
is it? Is it next
January
week, really?
6th?
No, it's January. It's January 1st, so we have
You-
to talk about
It will not be January 1st.
So we have to talk about it.
No, it's next
Told me
week.
that it was next
Oh,
Wednesday.
12/18,
It
12/18.
is. Our next Finance Committee meeting is a week from today. So luckily, we don't have to wait too long. Yeah, we should definitely change the January
Thank you.
1st one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving forward, last thing we have is our Finance Department update. I almost forgot about that. Ms. Dickinson, you think you can keep it to under a minute?
Yes, Jody Dickinson, Finance Director. I did create a report here that I'll be sending to you. Talks about our annual audit is underway. The audit testing is in the final stages. The financial statement drafting is progressing, but it's been delayed a bit because we're trying to spread the work out from the missing assistant director. So that was one of her main duties, was pulling the statements together. So we're working on that. We're sharing in that duty. And so the financial statements, we had thought this year might be the first we could get them out by December, but that's not going to be. So we're probably looking at end of January at the best. We've, in the budget area, the budget, as you know, the budget development process has started. The budget staff is busy, and the departments are working on their budget requests. And as you know, the process timeline has been passed by council, so that's set. On the staffing side, we've filled a senior accountant role who started recently, and she's being trained. We currently have a vacancy in our accounts payable division. One of the associates moved out to APD for another opportunity, so we're working on filling that position. And again, the assistant, and we've hired some cashiers recently. We have one position open, and I added a contractual assistant there for the time being to help them get caught up and to fill in when somebody's absent, because if the work at the cashier's desk and the utility billing doesn't slow down if somebody's absent or on vacation, so we've had some problems keeping up there. And so the assistant finance director position is advertised, and I've interviewed some candidates. I don't know if you have any questions about the finance director process, but I'll refer that to the assistant city manager. We've done some interviewing. We're not done with that process yet, so that's ongoing.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other comments for the good of the order?
No, I'll save my comments.
All right, seeing none, I move that we adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So moved.